this is a good morning, I'm telling you. There's some good stuff going on. Thank you. Glad to know there's somebody out there.
All the way in the back.
All the way in the back. Wow, that was a pretty sobering little piece of text that Pastor Jim read to us, wasn't it? Wow. I want us to bear with me because I'm going to try and lay a lot of groundwork before we can kind of make some sense of this whole thing, because it is confusing. I want to start off by talking about us as people, human beings in general, and us as a culture. And it seems that we are fascinated, and I could actually, it wouldn't be too strong language to say obsessed, with this idea of doing to others what they do to us. No. Is that what Jesus said? No, he said, do to others as you would have them do to you. You know, the preferred form of treatment that you want to get is what we're supposed to be getting. Okay. So make sure everybody's on page. And the funny thing about this is that, maybe it's not funny, but the actual fact of this is that, movies have raked in fortunes playing the same plot of a wronged individual, and it could be male or it could be female, who avenges those who mistreat them. And there's a whole list of stars that have made it, like Charles Bronson, Clint Eastwood, Steven Seagal, Sylvester Stallone, Bruce Willis. We could go on and on. And there's been some female stars who've done something. Halle Berry and J-Lo, Jennifer Lopez have also played the same plot line out, And what's interesting to me is there are whole genres of movies, and I don't think I'm exaggerating. I would suggest 95% of these genres play that same plot over and over again. Especially now that we have the technology, Marvel action characters and movies from the comics play that same rollout. War movies, westerns, spy movies, sci-fi flicks. It just goes kind of on and on. And see, we love to lay down big bucks to see someone get what's coming to them. Well, at least us guys do. Some of the girls or women are looking, what? See, this getting back thingy is biblical. And it's not only in the Bible, in the Old Testament, one time or two times. It's in the Old Testament 3 times. I see people help one say, I told you. This is good stuff. But here's where it gets very confusing. Here's the oddity of it. Both these passages are going to come from the same book, from Numbers. And they are close in proximity to each other. I'm just reversing the order here a little bit just to kind of for emphasis purposes. But it's the same God who states, but if there is a serious injury, you are to take eye for an eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, bruise for bruise. And then it's also that very same God who says this. 6 of the towns you give to the Levites will be cities of refuge to which a person who has killed someone may flee. Let me back up just a little bit. Cities of refuge. See, in that culture, accidents happen, just like they do in our culture. And somebody could accidentally be killed. And immediately family or friends would seek retribution. And so God, in His infinite wisdom, laid out these places where people could flee to and where the priests would be so they could just sort out the details and find out exactly what happened before somebody's life was innocently lost in an act of revenge. So here it is. On the one hand, you've got a God who says, okay, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, wound for wound, bruise for bruise. And on the other hand says, if someone is killed, then the person involved in that needs to get to a city of refuge, and we'll sort the details out. You know, it reminded me of something. Anybody ever watch I Love Lucy? And Desi used to say, "You got some explaining to do." Yeah, you know, we got some explaining to do. See, we have come to assume that those passages, eye for an eye, are, on the one hand, permission and even justification for our retribution, our vengeance, and our payback to those who have hurt us. We have to understand something. God, in reality, in using that analogy, was absolutely setting a standard for fairness and for equity when it comes to settling with people who have harmed us or done injustice towards us. Now, here's a word, it may be in our language. You can look it up and you can find it in the dictionary, but we don't practice it much. It's called restitution. Restitution. In God's infinite wisdom, He lays out a lot of laws, and we do not have time this morning to go through all of that. But there's a string of laws in the Pentateuch, which is the first 5 books of the Bible. Wherever those legal things come up in those books, God lays out these laws about dealing with people when it comes to goods and property and livestock, and also in people, but particularly in goods and property and livestock, that was stolen, damaged, or lost, and how it was supposed to be paid back, how it was supposed to be repaid to the person suffering the loss. And in all of those situations, the person who suffered the loss would be paid back from the perpetrator, the person who caused that loss, for the exact amount. You know, if it was livestock, replace the livestock, plus something extra. That was the restitution, plus something extra. Let me give you an example. Say, and I'm just using a sort of a modern day thing. Say there was an apple tree that was on the borderline between 2 people's property. And the boundary line wasn't all that clear. I mean, they didn't have a fence there. The tree was there. And so this one guy who had, you know, maybe a garden on one side of the tree, and the western sun would shade the garden. It was messing things up. Goes over and chops the tree down. Now, it's on the far end of this other person's property. So they go up there one day walking their line, and they say, "Wait, whoa, what is this?" And so he goes over and he says, "You know, that tree was on my line." He said, "Well, I thought it was on my line." "No," he says, "I can show you right here. It's on my line. You owe me a tree." Now, according to Old Testament, you would not only replant a tree, and if it was an apple tree that was bearing fruit, and you put a new tree there, it'd take a while before you'd have fruit again, wouldn't it? So you can replace the tree, but you couldn't replace the fruit. So in order for restitution to take place, what would happen is you would give that person the fruit that would have come off of that tree for as long as it took for that tree to bear that amount of fruit again. See, that's not only equitable, that's fair. That's fair. Now, the deal is that the wronged individual is supposed to be compensated with equity and the plus of fairness. But see, sometimes in serious losses like in death, or a person's part of their body, a hand or an arm or a leg or something, you can't always be compensated both with equity and fairness. And in those particular situations, the weight of the retaliation falls on the one who has been wronged, and to live with what can be compensated and move on. And just move on. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth was what is known in Jewish theology as a hyperbole, an exaggeration. I mean, think about it for a second. And Jesus talked about if your eye offends you, pluck it out. He was talking about lust, by the way. I don't see anybody here with a plucked out eye. Obviously, that's not what Jesus meant, to actually pluck your eye out. It was an exaggeration. In saying an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, God was absolutely setting a standard for us making things equitable and fair as much as we can that lies within our power. And then entrust it to God for both parties to move forward. Now the passage today makes it absolutely clear who has ownership and responsibility for vengeance. Listen to the beauty of this language that Jim read to us. Have I not kept this in reserve and sealed it in my vaults? Vaults here doesn't mean like some kind of expensive safe somewhere. The word literally could have been translated granary or cellar or storehouse. So, in my way of thinking, you only go to those kinds of places when you run out of something, don't you? When you run short of something. When time runs out, or when patience runs out. And patience is important in this discussion. See, we often say that, don't we? You've used up all my patience. How long did we practice it? Did we exhaust it? We usually say that when we've exercised our patience for about 30 minutes. You have to use up patience in order to get more patience. And see, God does that really well. Thank the Lord, He is so patient with all of us. Patience, patience, patience. But us, not so much. We don't do that well. And yes, there's a huge difference between harm and loss to property and harm and loss to people and to body parts. And we all feel cheated when we have had little or no compensation because we've suffered something really bad. We've had some kind of hurt, some harm, some loss. But the ownership of vengeance is not ours. It is mine to avenge. I will repay. Thus saith the Lord. Now see, last week I mentioned in here that the standards for the kingdom are way more demanding than the standards of the law in the Old Testament. And see, Jesus brings up this very topic of avenging. And yeah, He does that crazy thing He does, when it raises your eyebrows and He goes on. He says, you have heard it said, but I tell you. So in Matthew 5:38, Jesus, you have heard it said, eye for an eye, tooth for tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If someone strikes you on the right cheek, then turn to them the other cheek also. Somehow I just can't picture Bruce Willis or Sylvester Stallone doing that. Can you? No. But that is the standard of response that God has called every disciple who follows Him and is automatically part of the kingdom. And it's also the standard that Jesus honored on the night before His crucifixion. When the very people who worship the same God that He worshipped carefully had Him bound, and they took a hood and put it over His head. And then they took turns hitting Him again and again in the face and mocking Him and say, prophesy, teacher, who hit you? Until His face, they tell us, was this bruised visage that was absolutely unrecognizable, and not one time did He strike back at them. See, here's the thing. Jesus does that Jesus thing again. He even raises the standard higher. You've heard it said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies And pray for those who persecute you, that you may be called children of your Father in heaven. Do you understand the implications? If we fail to follow Jesus' advice in this, it's as if we have never been brought into the family of God at all. Or orphans, spiritually speaking. Orphans. See, we may not call people who hurt us our enemies, but we treat them that way, don't we? And what I've noticed over the years in my life, and maybe you can identify with this, is that what happens is we treat them the way nations treat each other. When they're at war with each other, they are enemies toward each other. First thing we do is keep them from entering our territory. It's called border patrol. So we watch and make sure that our paths don't cross. If they're in a grocery store and they're coming down an aisle, we go down another one. If we're headed out to the parking lot at the same time, we wait and let them drive off first. We patrol the borders. The next thing we do is we cut off all diplomatic relations with them. We don't talk to them. We don't respond to them. We take them off our Facebook page. We break off all communication with them. And then we consider what weapons work best against them. Who of their friends could I turn against them? What would hurt them the most? See, we all know the drill here for unforgiveness and retribution and vengeance. But see, every time we take ownership of vengeance, we are literally, spiritually trespassing. We're on somebody else's property that doesn't belong to us. It is mine to avenge, says God. And I know I'm with you here. The thought crosses all of our minds at some point of injustice. What if they get off scot-free? What if they are never repaid for what they have done? What if they keep on doing it again and again? And that's when we literally have to believe in the promises of God. God promises, I will repay. In due time, their foot will slip. Their day of disaster is near. Their doom rushes upon them. Has God ever broken a promise that God has ever made? No. God never breaks a promise. There's a New Testament parallel that co-joins this. In Galatians 6:7, Paul says this: don't be deceived. God can't be mocked. Whatever a person reaps, that they will sow. Man, it's time we stopped getting back and started moving forward. See, actors and actresses in the movies get paid big bucks for playing these roles where they get to avenge. They dispense violence and revenge and payback and mayhem and murder to everybody that wrongs them. When they're done with their role, they take off their makeup, and they take off their costumes. They collect their big check, and then they put on exquisite formal clothes, and they walk a red carpet, and the paparazzi pop those pictures at them, and all of us adoring fans are waving at them. Thankfully, us Christians who have been forgiven so much, we have a much bigger and better part to play in this life.